If you look, there's a plastic cup that's held up upon the water in 3 different scenarios. The problem is to investigate the sound variation. As you can probably hear, the qualitative difference here. There will be such a definite sound difference, and our goal is to examine that. A brief flow diagram of my presentation goes like so. Firstly, I'm going to examine the theories, 5 main theories regarding thin plate vibration, axial resonance, pitch dropping effect, amplitude damping, and the trapezoid special case. I'm going to examine the changes in the frequency and the amplitude. Then I'm going to move on to the experimentation. And in this part, I'm going to examine the sound change with respect to 3 different parameters of distance, length, and plate thickness. And I'm going to conduct experiments to finally arrive at a conclusion to find the sound variation. So let's get right into that. Firstly, upon thin plate vibration. If you look at an infinitesimal segment that lies upon the base of the cup, we can write an equation considering that there's a thickness and a stiffness constant for the thin membrane. In this case, a wave equation looks like this, with respect to 3 different variables. Now, if we solve this equation and use the first root and the first mode solution of the Bessel function, then we can find a first fundamental frequency as this equation, in which it's a function of the plate radius and the plate thickness. Now, secondly, if we take into account that this fundamental frequency changes in cases when the cup is submerged underwater, because there's a closed cavity now between the water surface and the cup, there's a pressure increase inside of the cup as the cup is further submerged. And that pressure also is simultaneous to a stronger restoring force that acts upon the cup's membrane, thus causing a frequency increase as with more submersion. Now, secondly, let's take a look at the theory for amplitude damping. As I had just told you before, as the cup is submerged underwater and it hits the sound, there's a certain maximum amount of the amplitude that this membrane, that this plate can be deformed. This deformation is proportional to the amount of the pressure force that can act to restore it. So the higher the pressure, the less amount of maximum deformation of the plate can occur, thus leading to a conclusion that more submersion means less amplitude and the amplitude damping effect to occur. So thirdly, let's take a look at the case of axial resonance and the Z direction. If we take a look at a cylindrical cavity like so, and find the mode solutions of standing waves, they form fundamental frequencies and third harmonics, and also fifth harmonics. Now, to find a solution to how these frequencies are formed, we start with a basic wave equation like so, and a Helmholtz equation for a linear case. And translating this into cylindrical coordinates, we get an equation ignoring the r and the theta component, considering the fact that the cylindrical cavity is symmetric with respect to its axis. Now, solving this equation, we arrive at a final fundamental frequency modes for the case. However, considering the case that the plate is also vibrating and the air outside of the cylindrical cavity can also vibrate, there's a necessary need to make an end correction for this equation. And for a case in which the cavity's end is unflanged, we add a term of 0.61 r for the extra amount of vibration that occurs outside of the cavity. Now, let's take a look at the standing wave theory for when it's underwater. Considering the fact that the acoustic impedance difference between the inside trapped air and the water is significant enough to cause a reflection and an influence upon the standing waves, what occurs is a basic standing wave equation with respect to geometry in this equation. Now we see here that it's 2L because the length of the cup itself is far more larger than the magnitude of the height in which the water influx comes in. This is due to the higher pressure of the cup that exists inside the cavity. Now, fourthly, let's examine the pitch dropping effect. If we take a look at the theory, when the standing wave length simultaneously overlaps with the region in which the water lies in, there's a sound velocity increase. And because of this increase in the velocity of the sound, we make a correction for that extra wavelength that needs to be added. And if we make that correction with respect to a simple ratio equation like so, for the distance traveled of the sound propagation inside water, and we can write an equation that has a velocity correction term. And if you look at this as a function of h, considering the fact that the velocity of the sound in water is almost 5 times larger than the velocity of sound in air, you can find that as h increases, the frequency will also increase. And as the cup approaches the water, the sound velocity will drop. Now what about the summary of what I've just told you so far? We can divide the tapping sound into two main categories, the standing wave and the plate vibration. The standing wave above water, when the height and difference between the cup and the water is smaller than 0.61 R, the pitch dropping effect occurs. When it's larger than 0.61 R, there's no change in the standing wave frequency. For cases when the standing wave is below water, there is no frequency change considering that the H of the influx of water does not increase significantly. But there is, however, a jump between the frequencies when above water and below water because the equations for the standing waves are completely different. Now for plate vibrations above water, there's no external force acting upon the plate, thus leading to no change in the frequency of the plate. However, for below water cases, because the pressure correspondingly increases with respect to more submersion, this frequency will increase as the submersion depth increases as well. So now all we have left to do is to confirm this theory. And in order to do so, I made an experimental setup that looks like this, consisting of a tapping machine, sound sensor, a cup, a water, and a ruler to measure the distance. And the water was filled to the top of the container when using the calculating the distance between the cup and the water surface. Now, the method I used were mainly sound sensor locations. To measure the plate frequency, I put the sound sensor close to the plate. For standing wave frequencies, it was put inside the cup for more accurate measurements of the standing wave frequencies. For cases when the cup is submerged underwater, in order to measure the standing waves, I had to use a small microphone and put it under in a wire length like so, and the cavity was raised up like this so that the mic could be submerged underwater, and that standing wave frequencies could be measured like so. After measuring the noises and recording it, I used the method of noise reduction on Cool Edit Pro in order to get rid of the tapping machine's sound noises so I could get the peaks that I was looking for. And the method I used to then analyze the frequency is fast Fourier transformation, with sampling rates of 44,100 Hz and the FFT size varying for each wave file. And the fundamental resonance frequencies and third harmonics of the standing waves were pretty conspicuous, as you can see. Now, to make sure that the peaks I was looking for were really the peaks that were necessary, I compared it with the log scale on MATLAB to find the fundamental resonance frequencies there. Now, if you look at the standing wave frequency change with respect to the cup length, you can see that there's a gradual increase, and the theory and the experimental data matches quite well. Thus, our calculation of the frequencies were pretty accurate. For cases of plate frequencies, as the plate thickness increases, the theoretical calculations for the plate and the experimental data also matches quite well, so we can be quite confident about which peaks we're looking at. So now let's look at the data for when the cup is above the water surface. Firstly, upon standing waves. You can see here, firstly, there's a constant region in which the standing wave frequency doesn't change, but from a radius below of 0.61 R, standing wave frequency substantially decreases. And this is the pitch dropping region that we can define. And if we hear the sound, to let you be confident about it, you see that the pitch definitely drops in the region of 0.61 R. Now, secondly, upon plate oscillation frequency, you can also observe a linear trend in which the theory and the experimental data matches quite well, and this frequency does not change. Now, secondly, let's look at the case for when the cup is below the water surface. In this case, we can see that the standing wave frequency doesn't have any kind of exponential change, but rather stays constant with the theoretical value of that was calculated. And for the case of the sound here, we can observe a higher pitch sound. As you can see, the sound standing wave frequency increases from above water to below water. Now, secondly, let's take a look at the case of plate oscillation frequencies, which has an increasing trend, as I explained before, as the pressure inside the cavity increases, or proportional increases in the amount of the plate oscillation frequencies. Now, if we take a look at the amplitude for when the cup is not submerged and when it is submerged, there's a substantial difference when, firstly, in the region from above water to below water. Now, the reason why is because this gap is because that when the cup is touching the water surface, there's suddenly a closed air and an entrapped surface of air that exists. And because of that, the pressure formation suddenly increases there, creating that gap. And this decreasing trend can also be explained by the increase in gradual pressure as the cup is submerged into the water. Now let's take a look at a more realistic case of a shape. We've approximated the cup as a cylinder, but what about cases of trapezoidal-shaped cups? How can we theoretically form that? Firstly, for the plate vibrational frequencies, we can tell that the frequencies won't change because it's flanged at the ends, and that's the same case for cylindrical cavities as well. But the axial resonance may be altered a bit. Now the reason is, if we take a look at an infinitesimal segment of a trapezoidal cavity, and we can divide that into many, many cylinders, this cylindrical cavity with a length dx is likely to have a similar trend with the equations that we found before. So what we can hypothesize about the case of the trapezoid is because there are infinite amounts of cylindrical cavities that have different radiuses, there will be a broader range next to the FFT peaks, but there will be similar axial resonance trends with the case of cylindrical cavities. But for end corrections, we take the average value of the radiuses of these cylindrical cavities, which can be calculated as the arithmetic sum. Now, if we take a look at the FFT data for a trapezoidal case, we can see that the peak frequencies and the second peak frequencies match pretty well with the theoretical calculations for the models we used before when R is substituted with the effective radius amount. Now let's vary the cup length of the trapezoid to see if with respect to the length we can observe a similar trend. And here we can indeed do so. We can look at the theoretical data curve, which matches quite well with the experimental data for a trapezoid with a certain length L. And as the value of the L increases, the frequencies of the standing waves also decrease. Now some of the errors existing here may be due to a miscalculation of the effective radius, although I used an arithmetic sum. But some future prospects of my experimentation would be to use better sums and better averages. So the conclusion of my presentation is firstly I divided tapping sound into two main categories, the cylinder and the trapezoid. I examined their differences in plate vibration and standing wave frequencies, and I examined the changes in the frequency and the amplitude, ultimately determined the sound variation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we have 2 minutes questions from the opponent, please.
Thank you for the nice report, but I have some questions. What would you say is the most important parameter for the problem?
I'd say the most important parameter for the problem itself, as the problem suggests, is the distance between the cup and the water.
Okay, thank you. And what would you say, what kind of waves do we actually have in this problem?
Can you repeat your question?
What kind of waves are in this problem relevant?
Okay, two main waves that I explained were firstly the standing waves that form inside the cavity due to axial resonance. The second form of wave is the thin plate vibrational wave for the solids.
Thank you. Actually we have, of course, boundary surfaces because there's water, there's air and something. Is the acoustic impedance a relevant parameter for this phenomenon?
Yes, indeed. I think acoustic impedance is definitely a relevant parameter in terms of calculating whether reflection will be a dominant factor or not.
Did you actually sometimes use different materials for your experiments?
The problem states to use a plastic cup, so that was the only
plastic is a
Yeah, there are many forms of plastic, but yeah, there were only one type of plastic that was kept constant as a individual parameter.
Now to experimental settings. Actually, do you think that fixing the cup or the damping of the apparatus as well as the basin and has influence, and to place the microphone has influence to your results?
Can you clarify your question once more?
Do your experimental setup have influences to your measurements? For example, the damping of the whole apparatus, the fixing of the cup, the position of the microphone, the size of the basin of the water?
Some of the parameters of the experimental apparatus may influence the sounds produced, and that was pretty much taken care of most of all in the equations. Some of the factors such as sidewall damping, I'll explain furthermore in the discussion how that's insignificant.
Okay, and which reproducible system did you use to get reproducible measurement values?
Very short answer, please.
I couldn't understand your question, so let's save it for the discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions, and now we have time for preparation of the opponent.